Hey there, I'm Brandon. This is the Dirt Church Devotional. You know, there's some passages in the Bible that can be kind of hard to understand and that we have a tendency to get wrong. One of them that I see gets a lot of traction, and I know they do it for good intent. It comes at the end of Mark chapter 8, and Jesus makes a statement. He says, if you're ashamed of me in this adulterous and sinful world, I will be ashamed of you when I come back. And a lot of people will take that passage and they'll put it on Facebook, they'll put it on social media and say something like, well, if you're not ashamed of Jesus, pass this on, tag 10 of your favorite friends or something like that. Like as if Jesus is going to be checking your Facebook post to make sure you passed on a spiritual chain letter or something. I don't think that's the case. Now, I'm not saying he won't check your Facebook post. You better be posting good stuff and not wrong stuff. And I'm not saying that it's bad for some to do that. What I'm saying is I think that they're getting the point of that passage wrong. And why do I say that? Well, let's go back to the context. In the context of that passage, the end of chapter 8, excuse me, Jesus has just got done rebuking Peter for rebuking him. Peter rebuked Jesus. Why did Peter rebuke Jesus? Because Jesus was saying some stuff that Peter didn't like. Now remember, if you back up just a little bit further, Peter had just declared that he understood Jesus is the Son of God, he's the Messiah, he's the blessed one to come. And Jesus had commended him for that. In fact, he said, look, you know what, your name is Simon, I'm going to call you Peter, and upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell won't prevail against it. Really kind of built him up. Of course, it wasn't Peter that Jesus was going to build his church on, it was that testimony. So then Jesus immediately goes into talking about his death. He says, look, we're going to Jerusalem. I'm going to be handed over to sinful men. They're going to crucify me. They're going to kill me. And on the third day, I'll rise. And then Peter steps up now in his newfound boldness, and he rebukes Jesus. He takes Jesus aside and he says, look, this will never happen. I'm rebuking that. You're not going to die, blah, blah, blah. Jesus looks at him, and he actually calls him devil. He says, get behind me, Satan. You don't have the things of God in mind. That's the context, all right? Then Jesus says, look, if you want to save your life, you're going to lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake, you'll save it forever. What good does it do a man to win the whole world but forfeit his soul? The obvious answer, nothing. Doesn't do you any good because this world is temporal. The soul is eternal. And then Jesus goes on to say, look, if you're ashamed of me, I'll be ashamed of you. So what does he mean by being ashamed? Within that context, if you're not willing to accept God's plan his way, you're demonstrating that you're ashamed of him. If you're not willing to step up and do things the way he wants you to do them, even when they don't make sense. See, it didn't make sense to Peter that the Messiah, the Son of God, would die. Why? Because in Peter's mind and in many of our minds, dying is losing. God wins. Jesus wins. Love wins. How can you win if you die? Well, that's because the dying was just the first part of it. After that, he was going to rise again. Paul says later in Romans, he says, look, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Okay? Same word. It's only used like 7 times in the New Testament. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Why? Because it's the power of God for the salvation of mankind. What's the gospel? It's the good news that Jesus took your place and my place on the cross. We committed the crime and he did the time. And if we're ashamed to let him do the time for us, if we're ashamed to say, you know what, I deserve this, but there's nothing I can do about it other than accept Jesus, if we can't allow that he paid the price, then he's going to be ashamed of us when he comes back. So I know you don't want to be ashamed. I know you want to let him pay the price for you, although it's kind of hard. So chew on that. Don't be ashamed of Jesus. Don't be ashamed of the way he did it. Don't be ashamed of the way he's calling you to do things, and don't be afraid to step out and do them his way. His way is the way that leads to life. By the way, Jesus said he is the way, the truth, and the life. All right? Nobody comes to the Father except through him. Chew on that. We'll talk to you next time.